The air inside the Fourth Judicial Circuit Court of Florida was thick with tension, a palpable electricity that seemed to crackle between every whispered conversation and rustling paper. The high-ceilinged chamber, with its dark mahogany paneling and stern portraits of past justices, had witnessed countless legal battles, but none as explosively personal as the one about to unfold. At the center of it all sat Judge Jared Smith, a man whose reputation for brutal efficiency and a razor-sharp tongue preceded him. His cold, unblinking gaze swept over the courtroom like a predator assessing its prey. On the other side of the bench stood Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, a woman whose political savvy and legal acumen had made her both revered and feared in equal measure. The case itself was already a media sensation, a high-stakes corruption trial involving a powerful lobbyist with deep ties to Florida's political elite. The defendant, Richard Holloway, was accused of funneling millions in illegal campaign contributions, and Bondi had been retained as his lead counsel. The prosecution, led by a fiery state attorney, had spent weeks building a meticulous case, but today's hearing was about a critical motion to suppress evidence, one that could make or break Holloway's defense. As the bailiff called the court to order, the spectators, journalists, legal scholars, and curious onlookers leaned forward in anticipation. Judge Smith took his seat with an air of impatience, his black robes settling around him like a shroud. The first exchange, a spark in the powder keg Bondi, ever the polished litigator, rose to present her argument with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms, just like this one. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady. The evidence in question was obtained through an unlawful search, in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. The warrant lacked probable cause, and the affidavit contained material omissions that— Judge Smith didn't let her finish. "Ms. Bondi," he interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension, "I've read your motion. Frankly, it's the same tired argument I've heard 100 times before. Are you seriously suggesting that a seasoned investigator just forgot to include critical details?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Bondi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the issue isn't whether the investigator forgot. It's whether the affidavit, as presented to the magistrate, was deliberately misleading." Smith leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have proof of that? Or is this just another one of your political strategies?" The implication was clear. He was accusing her of using her high-profile status to manipulate the case. The gauntlet thrown, a judge's contempt. Bondi's eyes flashed, but she kept her tone measured. "Your Honor, I'm here to argue the law, not my resume. If the court has an issue with my qualifications, I'd be happy to." "Oh, I have no issue with your qualifications," Smith sneered, cutting her off again. "I just question whether you've spent more time in front of a camera than a law book lately." The insult was deliberate, a public humiliation designed to undermine her in front of the entire courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. A few spectators gasped. Bondi's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice remained icy calm. "If the court is finished with the personal commentary, perhaps we could return to the legal merits of the motion?" Smith smirked. "By all means, counselor. But make it quick. I'd hate to cut into your next TV appearance." The tension reaches a boiling point. The back and forth continued, each of Bondi's points met with sarcastic rebuttals from the bench. It was no longer just a legal argument. It was a power struggle, a battle of wills between two figures accustomed to dominating every room they entered. Then, just as Bondi was citing a key precedent, Smith interrupted yet again. "Ms. Bondi, I've heard enough. Your motion is denied. Next case." The gavel came down with a deafening crack, but Bondi didn't move. "Your Honor, I haven't finished my—" "You're finished when I say you're finished," Smith snapped. "Unless you'd like to join your client in a jail cell for contempt." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. The moment that changed everything. Bondi didn't back down. Instead, she slowly reached into her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "Actually, Your Honor, before we adjourn, there's one more matter I'd like to bring to the court's attention." Smith's eyes flickered with irritation. "Make it fast." Bondi opened the folder and slid a document toward the bench. "This is a sworn affidavit from a courthouse clerk. It details several ex parte communications between you and the prosecution, discussions that were never disclosed to the defense. The blood drained from Smith's face. "That's a lie," he barked, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Bondi pressed on. "The affidavit also includes text messages in which you refer to my client as just another corrupt politician who deserves to rot." The courtroom erupted. Reporters lunged for their phones. The prosecution team looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. Judge Smith's hands trembled. This is inadmissible. You have no right to." "Oh, I have every right," Bondi said, her voice now carrying the weight of impending doom. "Because this isn't just about ethics anymore, Your Honor. It's about obstruction of justice." And with that, she turned toward the back of the courtroom, where 2 Florida Department of Law Enforcement agents had just stepped inside. The lead agent approached the bench. "Judge Jarrett Smith, you're under arrest for violation of judicial conduct statutes and possible felony obstruction. You have the right to remain silent." Smith's face turned ashen. "You can't do this. I'm a judge." But the cuffs were already clicking around his wrists. As the agents led him away, Bondi stood motionless, her expression unreadable. The once mighty judge, who had spent the last hour belittling her, was now being escorted out of his own courtroom in disgrace. The spectators were in shock. Some cheered. Others looked horrified. The bailiff stammered, "Court is adjourned?" But the real trial was only just beginning. The courtroom had barely settled from the shock of Judge Jarrett Smith's arrest when the aftershocks rippled through the legal and political circles of Florida. News vans swarmed the courthouse steps, reporters shouting over each other for a soundbite, while legal analysts dissected every second of the explosive hearing on cable news. But inside the courthouse, the drama was far from over. As the FDLE agents led Judge Smith away, the remaining spectators sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Pam Bondi, now standing with the quiet confidence of a chess player who had just declared checkmate, and the empty bench where, moments ago, a judge had wielded absolute power. The air was thick with tension, the kind that lingers after a lightning strike, leaving behind the scent of ozone and the promise of more storms to come. The immediate aftermath: a courtroom in chaos. Bailiffs scrambled to maintain order as journalists and onlookers erupted into hushed but frantic whispers. The prosecution team, led by State Attorney Daniel Reyes, looked as though they had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion, paralyzed, unsure whether to intervene, flee, or start damage control. Reyes, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, was uncharacteristically pale, his fingers gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Bondi, meanwhile, remained perfectly composed. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply closed her legal pad with deliberate calm and turned to her client, Richard Holloway, whose mouth was still hanging open in disbelief. "We'll need to file for dismissal," she murmured, her voice low but firm. "This judge's bias just invalidated every ruling in this case." Holloway, a man who had spent his career manipulating the levers of power, could only nod mutely. For once, the lobbyist had no clever quip, no backroom deal to offer. He had just seen a judge taken down in open court, and the architect of that downfall was the woman he had hired to defend him. The media frenzy. A scandal goes viral outside the courtroom. The story was already exploding. News alerts blared across smartphones. Breaking: Judge arrested mid-hearing after Pam Bondi exposes misconduct. Florida Judge Jarrett Smith in custody. Was this a setup? Bondi's revenge: how a former AG outmaneuvered a corrupt judge. Legal analysts scrambled to dissect the implications. Had Bondi orchestrated this takedown from the beginning? Had she known about Smith's misconduct before the hearing? Or had she simply seized the moment when the judge's arrogance finally crossed the line? Meanwhile, Smith was being processed at the county jail, his mugshot, a far cry from the stern judicial portraits lining courthouse walls, leaking online within minutes. His arrest report listed the charges: judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and violation of due process. The whistleblower, a shadow figure, emerges behind the scenes. The question on everyone's mind was, who had given Bondi the evidence? Rumors swirled about a disgruntled clerk, a scorned lover, or even a rival judge with a vendetta. But the truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in the shadows of power. Sources later revealed that the whistleblower was Elena Martinez, Smith's own courtroom stenographer. For months, she had watched in disgust as Smith brazenly flouted judicial ethics, bragging about burying defendants he disliked, mocking attorneys behind their backs, and even colluding with prosecutors to ensure convictions. When Bondi's team had quietly reached out, Martinez had handed over recordings, emails, and text messages, enough to sink not just Smith's career, but possibly the cases he had presided over for years. Bondi's next move, a legal earthquake with Smith in custody. Bondi wasted no time. Within hours, she filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Holloway, citing egregious judicial bias and prosecutorial misconduct. The motion was a legal grenade, threatening to blow up not just Holloway's case, but potentially dozens of others Smith had handled. Prosecutors, now in full panic mode, scrambled to respond. Some called for an emergency review by the state judicial board. Others whispered about retaliation. Would Bondi's enemies now come after her? But Bondi wasn't done. The press conference, a warning shot that evening. Bondi stood before a bank of microphones, her expression unreadable. Cameras flashed as she delivered a statement that would echo across the legal world. Today's events are a reminder that no one is above the law. Not judges, not prosecutors, not politicians. The system only works when those who enforce it also abide by it. A reporter shouted, "Did you plan this, Ms. Bondi? Was this a trap?" Bondi's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "The truth," she said, "has a way of revealing itself." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving chaos in her wake. The arrest of Judge Jared Smith was only the beginning. As the sun rose over Tallahassee the next morning, the political and legal world was already in upheaval. Headlines screamed about the scandal, legal analysts debated the implications, and whispers of a judicial purge spread through the halls of power. But for Pam Bondi, this was no time for celebration. It was time to finish what she had started. The whistleblower's testimony, a bombshell revelation. Elena Martinez, the stenographer who had risked everything to expose Judge Smith, sat in a secure conference room inside the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, headquarters. Across from her were two federal prosecutors and a stone-faced investigator. She placed a digital recorder on the table. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. He wasn't acting alone. With a deep breath, she pressed play. The recordings that would shatter a courthouse, the first clip, was damning enough. Judge Smith laughing with Assistant State Attorney Derek Voss about a defendant they both despised. "Don't worry," Smith's voice sneered. "I'll make sure the jury never hears about that missing evidence. By the time I'm done, this guy won't know what hit him." The second recording was worse. "Bondi's going to be a problem," Voss muttered. "Not for long," Smith replied. "I'll bury her motion, so deep she'll need a shovel to find it." The investigators exchanged glances. This wasn't just judicial misconduct. This was a conspiracy. The dominoes began to fall by noon. FDLE agents were executing search warrants at the courthouse, seizing computers, phones, and case files. The State Bar Association announced an emergency ethics review. And then came the biggest shock of all. Assistant State Attorney Derek Voss was placed on administrative leave. The message was clear. Bondi wasn't just after Smith. She was coming for the entire system that had protected him. Bondi's legal onslaught, motion after motion, while the media fixated on the drama, Bondi was in her office, drafting legal filings with surgical precision. 1. The motion to dismiss Holloway's case. Her first move was a scorched earth motion demanding the immediate dismissal of all charges against Richard Holloway. "The prosecution's case is irreparably tainted," she wrote. "When a judge conspires with the state to deny a defendant his constitutional rights, the only remedy is dismissal with prejudice." Legal experts knew what that meant. Holloway would walk, and he could never be retried. 2. The judicial misconduct complaint against Smith and others. Next, she filed a formal complaint with the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission, demanding not just Smith's removal from the bench, but disbarment. His actions were not mere errors in judgment. the document stated. They were deliberate, malicious, and criminal. 3. The civil rights lawsuit for wrongfully convicted defendants. Then came the nuclear option. Bondi announced she was representing 3 inmates who had been convicted under Smith's courtroom, all claiming they were denied fair trials. If even one person was wrongfully imprisoned because of this corruption, she told reporters, then the system failed, and I intend to hold it accountable. The counterattack. Smith's allies strike back, but Bondi's enemies weren't going down without a fight. 1. The smear campaign. Anonymous sources began leaking to the press. Bondi knew about the recordings for months. Why did she wait until now? Was this all a setup to help her high-profile client? Is she just trying to rehabilitate her own political image? 2. The legal countermove. A gag order request. Prosecutors filed an emergency motion to seal all evidence related to Smith's misconduct, arguing that public disclosure would taint the jury pool for other cases. Bondi's response was brutal. The state doesn't get to hide its corruption now that it's been exposed. The judge, a replacement for Smith, agreed, denying the gag order. 3. The hidden threat. Then, late that night, Bondi received a call from an unlisted number. A raspy voice on the other end said only, "You've made a lot of powerful enemies, Pam. Watch your back." She hung up, unfazed. "Try me," she muttered. The final blow, Smith's resignation by the end of the week. The pressure was too much. Judge Jared Smith, facing felony charges, disbarment, and possible prison time, submitted his resignation in a terse, one-sentence letter to the governor. But Bondi wasn't satisfied. "Resignation isn't accountability," she said in a press briefing. "He doesn't get to walk away. He needs to answer for what he did." The arrest of Judge Jared Smith was not just a legal proceeding. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through Florida's judicial system. The moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists marked the culmination of a meticulously planned takedown, one that had been months in the making. But the real drama was only beginning. This chapter delves deep into the arrest itself, the immediate fallout, and the hidden power struggles that erupted the moment Smith was led out of his own courtroom in disgrace. The arrest, a moment of reckoning. The FDLE silent operation. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, had been building their case against Judge Smith for weeks, working in the shadows to avoid tipping him off. The evidence, recordings, text messages, and sworn affidavits, was overwhelming, but they needed to act at the perfect moment. That moment came when Smith, in open court, publicly humiliated Pam Bondi, giving her the opening she needed to drop the bombshell that would destroy him. The agents move in as Bondi revealed the damning evidence of Smith's misconduct. 2 FDLE agents, dressed in plain clothes, had been standing near the back of the courtroom, waiting for her signal. When she turned toward them and gave the slightest nod, they moved. The lead agent, Detective Mark Reyes, approached the bench with the calm authority of a man who had done this before. "Judge Smith," he said, his voice firm but low, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, violation of judicial ethics, and conspiracy to deprive defendants of their constitutional rights." Smith's face twisted in fury. "You can't do this. I'm a judge." Reyes didn't flinch. Not anymore. The handcuffing, a symbolic fall from power. The bailiffs, who had moments ago been enforcing Smith's orders, now stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. But the FDLE agents didn't hesitate. Smith was ordered to stand. "Put your hands behind your back." For the first time in his career, Jared Smith was not the one giving orders. He was the one obeying them. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. The walk of shame as Smith was escorted out. The spectators erupted, some in shock, others in quiet satisfaction. Cameras flashed. Reporters lunged forward, shouting questions. "Judge Smith, do you have any comment? Did you conspire with prosecutors? Do you regret targeting Pam Bondi?" Smith said nothing, his face a mask of barely contained rage. But his eyes flickered toward Bondi, a silent promise of retaliation. The immediate aftermath, chaos in the courthouse. Prosecutors and panic. Assistant State Attorney Derek Voss, Smith's alleged co-conspirator, was seen rushing out of the courtroom, his face pale. Within hours, he was placed on administrative leave, and rumors swirled that he would be next to face charges. Defense attorneys demand retrials within 24 hours. Multiple defense attorneys filed motions to overturn convictions in cases presided over by Smith, arguing that their clients had been denied fair trials. One high-profile attorney, Carlos Mendoza, held a press conference. If Judge Smith was rigging cases, then every verdict he ever handed down is suspect. We demand a full review. The judicial scramble. The chief judge of the circuit was forced to reassign all of Smith's pending cases, and the Florida Supreme Court announced an emergency audit of his past rulings. The judicial system, which had long operated on the presumption of integrity, was now facing a crisis of confidence. The hidden power struggle. Who else was involved? The whistleblower's identity revealed Elena Martinez, the stenographer who had risked her career to expose Smith, was now under police protection. Sources revealed that she had been threatened multiple times, once finding a note on her car that read, "Snitches end up in ditches." The political backlash. Smith had powerful friends, lobbyists, politicians, even other judges, who were now scrambling to distance themselves. One unnamed state senator was overheard saying, "This is Bondi's revenge. She's not just after Smith, she's after the whole damn system." Bondi's next move, a civil rights lawsuit. Bondi wasted no time. She announced she was representing multiple inmates who claimed they were wrongfully convicted under Smith's corrupt rulings. "This isn't over," she told reporters. "We're just getting started." The arrest of Judge Jared Smith was not an ending. It was a detonation. In the days and weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire through Florida's political and legal landscape, exposing right at the highest levels of power. Cases were overturned. Careers were destroyed. Hidden alliances were unmasked. And at the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, the woman who had set the explosion in motion. This chapter chronicles the immediate and long-term consequences of Smith's downfall, the legal battles, the political maneuvering, and the personal vendettas that turned a single courtroom confrontation into a statewide reckoning. Section 1. The Judicial Crisis, Collapse of an Empire 1. The flood of overturned convictions. Within 72 hours of Smith's arrest, the Florida Innocence Project filed motions to review over 50 cases he had presided over. Prosecutors, scrambling to contain the damage, began offering plea deals and reduced sentences to defendants who might otherwise appeal. One case in particular made headlines. Marcus Green, a man serving 25 years for armed robbery, was exonerated after evidence emerged that Smith had suppressed key witness testimony that would have proven his innocence. At Green's release hearing, he stared directly at the cameras and said, "Judge Smith stole years of my life. How many others did he do this to?" 2. The disciplinary domino effect. The Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission launched an emergency audit of every judge who had worked closely with Smith. 3 more judges, all with ties to Smith's inner circle, were suspended pending investigations. One judge, Lillian Carter, was caught on an old recording joking with Smith about burying evidence in a high-profile drug case. She resigned before she could be indicted. 3. The state bars cracked down. The Florida Bar Association, facing public outrage, disbarred Smith within a month. But the scandal didn't stop there. At least 12 attorneys, including 2 prosecutors, were investigated for colluding with Smith to manipulate cases. One, Derek Voss, was indicted on felony obstruction charges after text messages revealed he had secretly tipped off Smith about defense strategies. Section 2. The Political Firestorm, Power Shifts in Tallahassee 1. The governor's dilemma. Governor Rick DeSantis, facing mounting pressure, was forced to publicly denounce Smith and announce a zero-tolerance judicial reform initiative. But whispers circulated that Smith had donated heavily to DeSantis's campaigns, raising questions about what the governor really knew. 2. The whistleblower's fate. Elena Martinez, the stenographer who exposed Smith, was offered witness protection after 2 attempted break-ins at her home. She later gave a televised interview. "I did what I had to do, but I never thought they'd come after me like this." 3. Bondi's rise. From lawyer to crusader. Bondi, now a folk hero to reform advocates, was inundated with requests to run for office again. She declined, but took on 7 more wrongful conviction cases, turning her law firm into a watchdog for judicial corruption. Her most famous quote from this period: "Bad judges are worse than criminals." Criminals break the law. Judges are the law. And when they betray that, they betray all of us. Section 3. The personal cost, threats, betrayals, and unfinished business. 1. The mysterious warning 2 weeks after Smith's arrest, Bondi's office received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single bullet and a note. Stop digging, or the next one's faster. She handed it over to the FBI, then held a press conference the same day, smirking. If they're trying to scare me, they picked the wrong woman. 2. Smith's desperate gambit facing decades in prison. Smith tried to cut a deal, offering names of other corrupt officials in exchange for leniency. But his credibility was destroyed, and prosecutors refused. At his sentencing, he finally showed remorse, but it was too late. I let power corrupt me, he muttered. The judge gave him 15 years. 3. The system's broken trust polls showed 68% of Floridians now distrusted the judiciary. Protests erupted demanding term limits for judges and mandatory ethics reviews. One victim's family put it bluntly on a protest sign. If judges can't be trusted, who can? Chapter 5N. The fight isn't over. The Smith scandal had exposed the rot, but had it changed the system? Would Bondi's crusade lead to real reform? Would the corrupt networks rebuild in secret? And who had sent that bullet? One thing was certain. The fallout was far from finished. Epilogue Preview. The reckoning continues. A shocking murder silences a key witness. Bondi uncovers a nationwide judicial corruption ring. The FBI steps in with a surprising ally.